Let's continue on and create our complete level cutscene. This cutscene will be used to tell the player that they have successfully completed the game. We'll incorporate additional audio tracks, fades, and the usual virtual cameras you should now be familiar with. Once again, we start off by blocking our scene and using the rule of thirds to compose our shot. The next cutscene that we're going to be creating is the end level cutscene. So let's go ahead and check out the director notes for this. Under the Great Fleece, there's a director notes folder. Drop that down and double click the end level. That will pop up the PDF for you. So in this, we're going to have one shot and we're going to do our traditional fade in. Darren is at the door grabbing the handle. And then as he's turning, the camera is going to zoom in to show him turning. And then we're going to capture his smile, and then we're going to fade to black and we're going to show the buttons to restart and quit, similar to what we just achieved in the captured cutscene. So I hope you're excited to get started. We'll block out our scene in the next video. In this video, we're going to block our scene and place our actors. So for this cutscene, we made it past the security guard and we're up to this vault door here. Now this vault door is where we're going to be placing our actor Darren. So let's go ahead in the scene view, get a good shot. Let's go ahead and go into our game folder, go into your prefabs, open up our cutscenes, and inside we have win level cutscene. So let's go ahead and drag this into our scene view to place Darren where he needs to be. So go ahead and get him in there, and we're going to have to rotate him so that he's actually facing the door. All right, so let's go ahead. We can position him as close to the ground as we can. Make sure he's on the floor. All right, and let's go ahead and push him back here, over here. Okay, let's go ahead and just rotate him, I guess, 180 degrees. So on the Y rotation, we'll go ahead and select the Y value and change it to 180. And from here, all right, that looks pretty good. So he actually is going to be reaching out to grab the handle. So we want to make sure that we actually line it up properly. If we run this, we can see the animation happen, but ideally we want to hook it up in timeline, which we're going to do in the next video. So let's go ahead and just run it, make sure his animation works. In the scene view, you'll be able to see it. Alrighty, he grabs it and he looks over. Perfect. If you want, you can actually make him touch the handle like this. So that's about, what is it, 0.25, let's see here. What value got changed there? We'll bring him a little bit closer to the door handle. Let's say right about there. Okay, I'd say that looks pretty good. In the next video, we're gonna go ahead and animate him so that we can preview his animation in timeline to set up our shot. I'll see you in the next video. In this challenge, I want you to animate the actor in timeline so that we can preview it through the timeline editor. You've had experience developing 2 cutscenes now. I'll see you in the challenge review. In this challenge review, we're going to show how I create or how I animate the actors in the timeline editor. To get started, we want to make sure that we're organized. So we're going to take this win level cutscene that has our actor Darren, and we're going to actually name this to actor, or actors, plural, just to keep a consistent naming convention. We have our actors. The next thing we need to do is we need to stay organized by creating a game object, an empty game object, that's going to be responsible for hosting our playable director. So let's call this level complete. This is our level complete cutscene. From here, we can add our actors inside. And our level complete cutscene. And actually, before we do that, let's remove it. We want to zero this object out. So let's hit 0, 0, 0. Let's place our actors in there. Okay. And now that we have our actor, what we can do is we can create a new timeline for this cutscene. So we'll go to Create. Let's go to our timeline folder. And here we can have a similar naming convention. So here's our sleeping guard timeline, and this is going to be our level complete timeline. Hit save. This will automatically add a playable director as well as an animator component, and it will add the animation track in the timeline editor. We do not need any of these, so let's go ahead and remove this from the timeline editor, select your playable director, and let's go ahead and remove this animator component. We have nothing on this component that's going to be animated. From here, we have our actor, and we can go ahead and animate it by adding an animation track. So go to timeline, add animation track. We want to drag in our actor because it has an animator component. And from here, we need to add from animation clip. But what animation clip do we want to add? Let's go into our actor, open up this end level, and there's an end level cutscene animation. So let's hop back into our playable director, which is the level complete cutscene. And we want to drop this hamburger menu down and add from animation clip, end level cutscene. So end level cutscene. Select that, hit enter, and we're good to go. From here, we can now preview in the inspector on the timeline editor this animation. You can see here Darren grabs the door and turns to face us. In the next video, we're going to compose our shot. In this challenge, I want you to compose the director's cut. So if you need to, you can use the director's notes as a reference, hop into the director notes. This is the end level PDF, double click it. Here's the PDF. So remember, we only have one virtual cam. So you need to set up your virtual cam and you need to compose your shot. And what we're going to be doing in future challenges here are we are going to animate to get the panning effect. All right, so there's only one camera here that's being used for this. And then see here that it says camera zooms in, okay? So you're gonna create one virtual cam, you're gonna compose the shot, consider the rule of thirds, and I'll see you in the challenge review. In this challenge review, I'm going to demonstrate how I would compose this shot. Now, because I have multiple monitors, I can go ahead and place the director notes on my other monitor. But if you don't have multiple monitors, a really good guide is to, or a good thing you can do is put this PDF on your mobile device. If you put this on like a public Dropbox and access it on your mobile device, you can use it to compose your shot according to what the director wants. So I'm gonna go ahead and place this on my other monitor so I have a reference. And what I wanna do now is I need to compose the shot using virtual cameras. So we're gonna go down, we're gonna create Cinemachine. We're gonna go to Cinemachine on the top, create virtual camera. It creates a Cinemachine VCam1, and we're going to rename this to Cinemachine, and let's call this Cinemachine. This is going to be full shot, so we're going to call this Cinemachine full shot. Okay, so here's our Cinemachine full shot, and what we can do now is we can select this object, and what we want to do here is we want to compose it to what we're looking at in the scene view. So we can go to Game Object, Align with View, or use the hotkey Control-Shift-F. So if I hit Control-Shift-F, there's our shot. And what I want to do now is I want to get it as closely to what the directors have as possible. Okay, so I'm going to drag that down a bit. Let's go ahead, and we can see a bit of the railing here. So I'd say maybe about like right here. Let's hit Control-Shift-F here. And I'd say that actually looks pretty close. We have the door. I have Darren nicely aligned using the rule of thirds within these corner points of my dead zone. And ideally what we're going to do from here is we're going to zoom in to get to Darren looking at us. All right, so we'll start here. And I'm going to go ahead and say I'm happy with this shot. And ideally what we would do is we would zoom in. So let's go ahead and see if we can mimic that real quickly. So to zoom in here, we would come to about right here to get the other director's cut. And we would look at Darren, so I'm happy with that. Okay, so it starts here and then we'll zoom in. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure we're staying organized. So let's go ahead and create, using our other ones as a reference, we had CM virtual cameras. Let's create a new empty game object using Control-Shift-N or create empty. And let's call this Cinemachine Virtual Cameras. We'll drag the CM full shot inside of here. You always want to zero it out first. And then CM full shot. And place this inside your level complete scene. And that wraps up composing our shot. In this video, together we're going to animate this shot of the zoom in. Now, when we were composing our shot, we did so using the use of one virtual camera. However, I think what I'd like to introduce here is the blending that I demonstrated in our first cutscene. This is a great example of blending two camera positions together. So what I want to do is, first thing first, we need to actually be able to transition to this Cinemachine camera, or this virtual cam. In order to do that, we need to actually incorporate our Cinemachine brain into the timeline editor. So in order to actually be able, in order for the main camera to take control of our virtual cam, we need to actually drag the main camera into the timeline editor. Select Cinemachine track, and that's going to add our Cinemachine brain. From here, we can actually add our virtual cams to timeline. So right click, add Cinemachine shot clip, and we can drag our Cinemachine full shot. And now we can actually cut between these cameras. So we have our first camera shot, and as we play this animation, as he's turning is when we want to zoom in. Let's go ahead and actually create a second virtual camera for that. So we'll go ahead, let's go to Cinemachine, create virtual camera, and let's call this Cinemachine close-up. Okay, and place this inside your Cinemachine virtual cameras game object. And from here, let's go ahead and position our shot. So if we look at our timeline preview here, at what point do we want to have this shot? I'd say about right here when he's starting to turn his head. And we'll go ahead and position our camera here. So if we go to our close-up, let's select it and let's go right here. Okay, we may want to be even a little closer. And let's see here. A little bit higher. Here's our close-up, Control-Shift-F to align the view. And let's go ahead and play this and see how it looks. Okay, so he's animating. Let's make sure our close-up camera is soloed. And here, let's actually add this to our animation clip so we can see the cut. So if we go to our timeline clip, so if we go to timeline, let's shrink this down a bit. Let's right-click, add Cinemachine shot, and add your close-up camera. This way we can actually cut between them. Okay, so here we are. We have our first cut, and then here is our second cut. So I think our second cut should take place right about as he's turning. So let's go ahead and lengthen this out. All right, so here we go. So we have our first cut, and we have our close-up. All right, I'd say that looks pretty good. And what we can do now is instead of cutting, we want to have that zoom in effect. And what we can do is we can blend these. So let's go ahead and actually blend the animation. All you have to do is drag it and to create that little crossfade. So let's go ahead and test this out. Here's Darren opening the door. Oh, and my timeline editor has stopped working for this preview mode. In order to fix it, I have to restart Unity. Let's go ahead and preview this. And here's Darren opening the door. And we do a super fast, you see how quickly that was, that we actually zoomed into there. So what we can do is first you want to make sure that this close-up is the length of the clip. But also let's go ahead and increase the fade of this. Let's make it happen much, much slower. So if we actually preview it, we can see here, we're going in, and here we are. So that looks pretty nice. Let's go and see how that looks in the editor. Let's preview it. I'm much happier with that shot. So another thing that we can do here to kind of smooth this out so that's not so mechanical here, like we're just kind of floating around sitting, is we might actually be able to add some noise to the cameraman who's holding this. If you select our Cinemachine full shot virtual cam, under our noise or under our properties of our virtual cam, you can see here that we have our aim and body properties, and then we have a noise property, which allows you to basically, it's probably set to none, but we can add basic multi-channel purlin noise, which will allow it to basically have some natural movement as if a director or a cameraman was holding the camera. So what we can do here is Unity gives us a handful of select noise maps that we can choose from. So all you have to do is use basic multi-channel purlin, and you can actually modify the amplitude and the frequency of how rigid the cameraman or camera lady is shaking the camera. So what we can do to set this up is there's a definition that it requires. It's a noise setting. So if you hit this little circle with a dot, there are pre-selected noise definitions. So we have a default noise, we have handheld, normal to extreme. So let's go ahead and do one of the extreme ones and see how that looks. Select it, and let's go ahead and test this out. If we select our playable director, we can go ahead and preview this, and you'll see here that it has natural noise movement so that it's not just a static shock. So if we actually preview it, you can see here we have quite a bit of noise here, and we zoom in. And it might be a lot, it gives it a lot more of a human-like nature feel. So let's go ahead and mess around with some of these settings here. So on the full shot, instead of the extreme movement, let's go ahead and do a subtle noise. Let's see what the default noise is. So if we go to the default noise, and we can go ahead and play this, click on your playable director. Let's see. All right, so I didn't notice anything with the default noise. So let's go ahead, click on your full shot. Let's actually go back to the extreme, and I'm curious to see what happens when we adjust these frequency and gain settings on the amplitude. So let's go to the normal extreme. And let's go ahead and increase the amplitude to like 4 and the frequency to like 2. Let's see how crazy this is. Okay, and that's like nuts. It's almost like an earthquake, right? All right, so let's see if we can go ahead and mess around. Let's see if we can get a nice proper noise map here. So let's go ahead and change the settings. I'm going to set the frequency and gain for the amplitude and frequency back to 1. And let's go ahead and select a new definition. The definition I want to use, let's go ahead and do a normal mild. Handheld tele. Let's go ahead and use a normal mild. Let's see how that looks. And by all means, please mess around and experiment with this. So let's go ahead and select our playable director, and let's preview that. Okay, I'm very happy with that. It's very subtle, but noticeable. And there's our cutscene. Before I go, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and clean this up, because this is our cutscene. We want to go ahead and place this inside of our cutscenes game object. And last but not least, let's go ahead and make our published changes. All right, guys, I will see you in the next section. In this challenge, you need to create, similar to what we just created in our captured cutscene, you need to create the fade from black to alpha for the intro. And then as this cutscene comes to an end, you need to fade from alpha to black and bring out the same UI menu that we created for the captured cutscene. So I'll see you in the challenge review. In this challenge review, we're going to be creating all of the camera fade effects, from the intro fade to the outro fade, bringing the UI menu. Okay, so to get started, what we need to do is we need to select our cutscenes. We need to go into our level complete cutscene, and we need to add our UI elements. So the first thing we want to do is we want to do the black fade to alpha for the intro of the cutscene. So to do that, we're going to right click our playable director. We're going to go to UI, and we're going to add an image, which is going to be our fade. So this is going to be our fade image. So camera fade. Okay. So from here, we have our camera fade. It should be black to start. Also, it should take up the entire screen. So you want to select the anchor and select the bottom right corner. From here, select the left column, zero it out. The top should be 0, and the right and bottom should also be 0. Last but not least, you want to select the canvas, and you want to set the UI scale mode to scale with our screen size. From there, we can go ahead and take this canvas and drag it into our level complete cutscene. So now that we have that working, what we can do is we can select our playable director for the cutscene that we're working on, and we're going to add an animation track. And the first thing we're going to be creating is our animation fade. So animation track, let's go ahead and add our camera fade in there, the object that we're going to animate. We can go ahead and start recording. Select your camera fade. To create the first frame, we just need to control the alpha. So we're going to be at 255. And at the halfway mark, so at about the 0:30 mark, which is half a second, we will go ahead and set the alpha to 0. Okay, let's go ahead and test this, see how it looks. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have our close-up, everything happens, and I'd say about right here after the acknowledged success, from here we're going to go ahead and fade to black. So we'll go ahead and create another frame. So just move it a little bit to create the keyframe. So we'll go from 0 and then to the end, which will be alpha. Or a full opaque. So bring it up to 255. And if we test this, we can go ahead and stop recording. We can go ahead and hit the play button in the timeline editor. You'll see here that we had a nice black to alpha here. It plays. And then here we have a fade to black. So our fade to black, we can actually extend it a bit if we want. So we can go ahead and take our keyframe here. And let's actually go ahead and extend everything. So basically if we drag out the animation of the actors, it's just going to hold the last frame. And that's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead, we can double click on our animations here to bring up the dope sheet. And for the last frame, let's just go ahead and drag that out. So make it about 6.45 maybe. Let's see how that looks. And actually let's drag it out a little further. Let's make it about the 6 second 6:47th mark. Let's go ahead and play this, see how it looks. Half a second fade. And there we go. Much happier with that result. Okay, so that is our camera fade. The next thing we want to do is create the main menu. All right, so for this, all we have to do, we're going to go to UI, and we're going to create an image for our text. So this is going to be our game over text or game over image. Very similar to the same process we used to create the previous menu. So game over image. We'll go ahead on the source image here. We will drop into our game folder. Let's go to images or UI sprites. Here we go. And we have our game over text. So select your game over image. Let's change out the source image by going to the game over text and dragging it. There's our game over. Preserve the aspect ratio so that it's not stretched. And set this to about 250 by 100. So that looks pretty good. The next thing we want to do, and actually instead of game over, it's actually going to be congratulation text. So let's go ahead and rename this to congratulations. So congrats image. And we'll change the source image to be congrats. There we go. Congratulations, Darren. You did it. Preserve aspect ratio. And let's go ahead and set this to about 300. Okay. Now what we can do is we can go to restart and quit buttons. So let's go ahead and on our canvas, right click UI. We're going to create a button. And the UI sprite image is going to be our restart button. From here, you want to make sure you preserve aspect ratio so we don't stretch the image. And set this to about 300 by 60. Let's go ahead and position it on screen where we'd like. Okay, so that looks pretty good right here. You can adjust the size however you'd like. So let's maybe make it like 210 by 40. I'm happy with that. All right, and what we can do now is we can call this the restart button. And we'll create all the functionality for these buttons later in the course. So we have a restart button, followed by, we'll duplicate this by hitting Control D, and this will be our quit button. And let's go ahead and space that out. So about right here. And the sprite for that is going to be the quit. Alrighty. So you'll notice that it's a little blurry, and that's because each component has a text object. Delete the text inside there. So open up each one, select the text, delete the text. And there we go. The next thing we want to do is we want to animate this entire canvas object so that we can grab all of the alphas of these 3 elements and control them at once. So on our playable director, we need to add an animation track. And on here, we are going to drag our canvas. It's going to create an animator component. And all we have to do now is go into the record mode. And to create our first frame, all we have to do, and actually, before we create our first frame, when do we want to actually start displaying the UI elements? As we fade to black, right? So let's go ahead and get to a point where we're starting to fade. And I'd say right about here, we'll go ahead and start bringing the elements in. So let's select our canvas elements here. So our quit button, restart button, and the congrats image. Select them all, open up the color, and we can create our first keyframe by adjusting the alpha. So it's going to start at 0, close it, and when should it be full opaque? By the end. So let's go ahead, go as close to the end as you can, select the color palette again, and increase the alpha value to 255. From here, we can stop recording, and we can go ahead and play it through. So here we have Darren opening the door. We zoom in, and we acknowledge our success, and there we go. Congratulations, Darren, you did it. All right, guys, that wraps up this cutscene. The last thing we want to do is we want to make sure we're staying organized to make sure your canvas is within the level complete cutscene, and make sure this complete cutscene is within the game over cutscene, or I'm sorry, not the game over, the cutscene's parent object. Once you've done that, save your scene. Let's go ahead and publish these changes as we are now completely wrapped up with this cutscene. So let's see here. Wrapped up win level cutscene. Publish those changes. In the next section, we get to our grand cinematic event or cutscene, which is the intro cutscene, where we're actually going to be diving into voiceover, sound effects, and we'll revisit these cutscenes to incorporate sound effects once you've learned how to use the new audio mixer. So I'll see you guys in the next section.